I never imagined that silence would become my strongest companion. Not because I wanted it to be, but because life slowly taught me that speaking does not always mean being heard. My name is Evelyn, that I am 70 years old. And this is the story of how I learned that dignity does not shout. It waits. I worked as a school secretary for most of my life, that I arrived early, left late, and rarely missed a day, that I typed lesson plans, answered phones, wiped tears, and kept quiet when no one noticed how tired I was. I was never wealthy, but I was careful. Every dollar had a purpose. That house, the one my son told me to leave, that I paid for it. Every month, for 22 years. When my husband passed away, the house became too quiet, not empty, just quiet in a way that echoes. My son Marcus suggested I move in with him and his wife. He said it would be easier, safer. I believed him. At first, it felt like family again. Shared dinners, polite conversations. But kindness has a way of fading when comfort settles in. Little things began to change. My seat at the dining table disappeared. Why groceries were separated from theirs. Why names stopped being included in plans. I told myself not to take it personally. People get busy. Life moves. But one evening, while I was watching television quietly in the living room, Marcus stood in front of the screen and turned it off. He did not raise his voice. That was what hurt the most. He said, "Mom, we need to talk." His wife stayed in the kitchen, that I could hear the sink running. Marcus said, "This is our house now, that we need our space. You should find somewhere else to stay." I looked at my hands. They were folded neatly in my lap. I nodded. I did not remind him of the down payment, that I did not mention the mortgage statement still in my name, that I did not talk about the nights I skipped meals to make payments. I stayed quiet. That night I packed one suitcase, just the essentials, clothes, documents, one framed photograph. I sat on the bed until morning. No tears came. Sometimes shock dries them before they form. I stayed with a friend for a while, then a small room I could afford on my own. I did not call Marcus, that I did not post messages, I let silence speak for me. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon my phone rang. It was Marcus. His voice sounded different, tired, uneasy. He asked about paperwork. The bank needed clarification. Names on documents did not match what he expected. I listened. I told him to come by the next day. When he arrived, he sat across from me quietly, and angered, and confidence. I placed the documents on the table, every payment, every signature. He stared at them longer than he spoke. I did not say I told you, so that I did not ask for apologies. I said this house was never about ownership. It was about family. Marcus did not answer. Some lessons take time to settle. I did not move back. I chose peace instead. Because sometimes strength is knowing when to let go without losing yourself. I stayed quiet, and in that quiet I finally heard my own worth. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly folded into months. I in that small rented room. I learned new rhythms. Morning light through thin curtains, the sound of other people's footsteps in the hallway, the hum of a world that did not know my story. At first, the quiet felt heavy, not lonely exactly, just unfamiliar. For years, my identity had been tied to being needed, a wife, a mother, a helper. Now, there was no one asking me where I was going or when I would be back. And strangely, that frightened me more than being asked to leave. I found comfort in routine, morning walks, simple meals, short phone calls with old co-workers who still remember my laugh. I did not speak about Marcus, not because I was protecting him, but because I was protecting myself. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I realized something quietly important. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions without asking permission. The thought surprised me. I had always thought independence was loud, assertive, bold, but mine arrived softly, like a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Months later, Marcus called again. This time his voice was softer. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral, at a small cafe near the park. I agreed. When I arrived, he was already there. He stood when he saw me, an old habit from childhood. We sat across from each other. the space between us filled with unspoken memories. He talked about stress, about pressure, about how life had felt heavier than he expected. I listened. He apologized, eventually, not dramatically, just a quiet sentence, spoken with effort. I nodded. Forgiveness does not always arrive instantly. Sometimes it comes in layers. I told him I hoped he would learn to see people before comfort, especially family. He lowered his eyes. We parted without hugs, but without anger. And that was enough for that day. I walked home slowly. The park was full of laughter and movement. I sat on a bench and watched people pass, young couples, older hands held gently together. I realized then that my life was not over. IT had simply changed direction. I began volunteering at the local library, helping children with reading, listening to their stories. They did not know my past, they only knew that I showed up. And that felt like purpose again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the house, the walls I painted, the memories held there. But I do not miss it the way I thought I would. Because peace, once found, becomes difficult to trade for anything else. I stayed quiet when it mattered most. And in doing so, I found a voice I did not know I had. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. And that, I learned, was enough. As the seasons shifted, I noticed how time softened the sharpest edges of memory. What once felt like rejection slowly became distant, and distance gave me perspective. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, stopped wondering what I could have said differently. Some answers only arrive when questions are laid to rest. I began writing again, just small things at first. Thoughts, moments, lessons I wish someone had told me when I was younger. I never planned to share them. They were simply a way of listening to myself. One evening, a young woman at the library asked if I had ever been afraid to start over. Her voice trembled when she asked. I told her the truth. I said fear does not disappear when you get older. IT just becomes quieter, and when you learn to sit with it, it stops controlling you. She smiled, not because her fear was gone, but because she felt understood. That night, I realized my story still had purpose beyond pain. Marcus and I spoke occasionally after that, not often, but with honesty. We did not rebuild what was lost, that we built something new, something slower, something more careful. And I was okay with that. I learned that family does not always look the way we imagine it should. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like space. On my 71st birthday, I treated myself to a small cake. I lit one candle. Just one. Not for age, but for clarity. I sat by the window and watched the city breathe. Cars passing. Lights flickering on in distant apartments. I felt grateful, not for what I endured, but for what I learned. That silence is not surrender. That kindness does not require sacrifice of self. That dignity lives in knowing when to walk away with your head held high. My life did not become extraordinary. IT became peaceful. And sometimes that is the greatest gift of all. I stayed quiet when my heart was breaking. And when it healed, it spoke softly. Not to demand, not to accuse, but to remind me that I was always enough. The days after my birthday passed gently. I stopped counting time and losses and started measuring it in calm moments. That a warm cup of tea in the morning, that a familiar smile from a neighbor, the sound of children laughing between library shelves. These things did not replace what I lost. They stood beside it, and that made all the difference. I began to notice how often women my age disappear quietly from their own lives, not because they want to, but because they are expected to make room. For children, for spouses, for comfort that is never theirs. I had done that for decades without realizing it. Now I practice staying present, staying honest, staying gentle with myself. One afternoon, Marcus showed up unannounced. I was surprised but not shaken. He looked around my small room, taking in the simple furniture, the neatly folded blanket, the books stacked by the chair. He said, "You seem different." I smiled. I told him that peace has a way of changing how you stand in a room. He nodded slowly. We talked for a while, not about the past, about his work, about his worries. I listened the way I always had. but this time without losing myself in it. When he left, he hugged me, briefly, carefully. It was enough. That night, I sat alone and thought about how love evolves, how it can survive mistakes, how it sometimes needs distance to breathe. I realized I did not need closure the way I once thought I did. I had already closed the door gently behind me, and in doing so, I opened another one that led inward. I am 70 years old, and I am still becoming, not into someone new, but into myself. My voice is quiet, but it is steady, and it carries the truth of a life that learned to choose dignity over noise. I stayed quiet, and I stayed whole. The weeks that followed carried a steady rhythm, and I learned to trust it. Each morning, I woke before the sun fully rose. The city outside my window stretched awake slowly, and I liked being there to witness it. There was comfort in watching something begin without needing to interfere. I made breakfast the same way every day. Simple. Toast, tea, fruit when I remembered. I ate slowly, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I no longer felt rushed by expectation. For most of my life, time belonged to other people. Now it belonged to me. At the library, the children began to recognize me. They waved when they arrived. Some ran straight to my table, eager to show me what they had learned. I listened to them read aloud, their voices uncertain at first, then stronger with encouragement. I never corrected them harshly. I remembered how fragile confidence could be. One boy asked me once why I always smiled when people struggled. I told him that effort mattered more than perfection. As the words left my mouth, I realized I was speaking to myself as much as to him. In the afternoons, I walked through the neighborhood park. I noticed the same people at the same times. A man feeding birds. A woman practicing slow stretches near a tree. We never spoke, but we acknowledged each other with small nods. It felt like belonging without obligation. Some evenings were harder than others. Memory does not disappear simply because peace arrives. It waits patiently, testing your strength when you least expect it. There were nights when I thought about Marcus as a child, his small hand in mine, his laugh when I pushed him on the swing too high, the way he used to fall asleep against my shoulder during car rides. I let those memories come. I did not push them away. I understand now that love does not vanish when boundaries appear. It changes shape. I learned to hold both truth and tenderness at the same time. One afternoon, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my daughter-in-law. Her voice sounded unsure, as though she had rehearsed the call many times before making it. She asked how I was. I answered honestly. I said I was well. There was a pause. Then she apologized, not in a dramatic way, not with excuses, just a quiet acknowledgement. I thanked her. We did not become close. We did not need to. Sometimes, peace is simply the absence of conflict. As the months passed, I noticed something else changing. My reflection in the mirror felt unfamiliar, but not in a frightening way. My posture had shifted. I stood differently now, straighter, calmer. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into spaces that no longer welcomed me. Now, I took up exactly as much room as I needed. On a rainy afternoon, the library closed early due to weather. I walked home slowly, letting the rain dampen my coat. I did not rush to escape it. There was something cleansing about allowing discomfort without resistance. When I reached my room, I changed into dry clothes and sat by the window. I watched raindrops trail down the glass, each one taking its own path. No two move the same way. That thought stayed with me. Life does not require one correct direction. It allows many. I began sleeping better. Deep sleep, the kind that settles into your bones. Dreams came softly without urgency. When I woke, I felt rested in a way I had not felt in years. I realized how much tension I had carried without naming it. Responsibility can be a heavy thing when it is never shared. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I caught myself humming. The sound surprised me. I had not done that in a long time. It felt like a sign, not of happiness exactly, but of ease. Later that week, Marcus called again. This time he did not need anything. He simply wanted to talk. We spoke about ordinary things. The weather, his work, a movie he had watched. I listened. When the call ended, I did not feel drained. That was new. I understood then that relationships should not cost you your peace. If they do, something must change. As the year moved forward, I marked small milestones. The first holiday spent alone without sadness. The first time I declined an invitation without guilt. The first time I chose rest without justification. Each moment built upon the last. I did not announce my transformation to anyone. I did not need witnesses. The change was internal. One day, a woman at the library recognized me from years ago. She had been a teacher at the school where I worked. We laughed softly at the coincidence. She asked how retirement was treating me. I thought for a moment before answering. I told her that I was not retired from life, just from noise. She nodded as though she understood completely. As winter approached, I bought a small plant for my room. I placed it near the window and tended to it each morning. Watching it grow gave me quiet satisfaction. Growth does not ask for permission. It responds to care. I thought about how often I had poured care into others without saving any for myself. I was learning now. Slowly, gently. There were still moments of doubt, still questions that lingered without answers. But I no longer needed certainty to feel whole. I had learned that self-respect is built in small, consistent choices. Choosing to leave when staying causes harm. Choosing silence when words would only wound. Choosing yourself when no one else will. As my 72nd year approached, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the loud, impatient kind. The steady kind that waits without fear. I knew there would be more challenges, more misunderstandings, more moments that tested my resolve. But I also knew this. I had survived losing the place I thought defined me. And in doing so, I discovered a deeper home within myself. I stayed quiet when my voice would have been ignored. I spoke softly when it mattered most. And in the end, I learned that a quiet life can still be a powerful one. I am Evelyn, and this is not the end of my story. It is simply the chapter where I finally learned to listen to myself. I woke the next morning with a sense of steadiness that felt earned. Not borrowed from routine, not borrowed from hope. Earned. Sunlight touched the edge of the curtain, and I let it stay there for a while before rising. There was no rush, no obligation pulling me forward, just the simple fact of another day arriving. I washed my face slowly, noticing the lines around my eyes. They no longer felt like marks of exhaustion. They felt like proof of endurance. Outside, the street moved at its usual pace. People heading somewhere important. Deliveries arriving. Conversations overlapping and passing. I watched without envy. For years, I believed movement meant meaning, that staying busy protected me from being forgotten. But now I understood something different. Stillness can also be a form of presence. At the library, a new volunteer joined us. She was young, nervous, eager to prove herself. I recognized that look immediately. I had worn it once. She apologized too often, asked permission for everything, worried about doing something wrong. I gently told her that learning takes space. She thanked me, relief visible in her shoulders. Guidance does not require authority. It only requires care. As weeks passed, I noticed how people began seeking me out without realizing why. A quiet question here, a pause beside my chair, a shared silence that felt safe. I did not offer advice unless asked. Listening had become my language. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Real paper, handwritten. It was from Marcus. He wrote about responsibility, about regret, about understanding things too late. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for anything. He simply wrote. I read the letter once. Then again. I placed it in a drawer without responding. not because I was withholding, but because I had learned that responses should come from readiness, not pressure. Days later, I cooked a meal just for myself. Nothing elaborate, something warm, something familiar. I ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. That choice mattered. At night, I began turning off the lights earlier. Rest came easier now. Sleep felt deeper. Dreams changed too. Less tension, more wandering. I dreamed of open fields, of walking without destination. When I woke up, I felt no need to interpret them. Some things do not need explanation to be meaningful. As time passed, my sense of identity shifted again. I stopped defining myself by what I had survived. Survival had done its work. Now I was living. A neighbor invited me for tea. We talked about ordinary things, weather, recipes, memories that did not hurt. Connection does not have to be intense to be real. One evening, during a quiet walk, I realized I was no longer replaying the moment I was asked to leave. The memory existed, but it no longer ruled my thoughts. That realization felt like freedom. Pain loses power when it is no longer rehearsed. I began sorting through old belongings, not out of sadness, but clarity. I released items tied to expectations I no longer carried. Letting go can be gentle. As spring approached, the plant by my window bloomed unexpectedly. I smiled when I saw it. Growth often arrives quietly without announcement. I thought about how many times I had bloomed unseen. That did not make it less real. Marcus visited again months later. This time there was no tension. We spoke like two adults learning each other anew. He noticed the change in me, said I seemed lighter. I told him peace does that. We parted with warmth, not obligation. After he left, I did not sit with lingering thoughts. I returned to my evening as planned. That felt like progress. I learned that healing does not always look dramatic. Often, it looks like neutrality where pain once lived. As another year unfolded, I felt rooted in myself. Not rigid, grounded. I stopped explaining my choices. I stopped justifying rest. I stopped measuring my worth through usefulness. Value does not require exhaustion. One morning, while watching the sunrise, I realized something simple and profound. I trusted myself. That trust had been missing for a long time. Losing it had been subtle. Regaining it was deliberate. I stayed quiet when speaking would have betrayed my peace. I moved forward without announcing it. I allowed my life to become smaller in size but richer in meaning. And in that quiet richness, I found something lasting. Contentment. Not loud, not perfect. But it's true. I am still here that I'm still learning, still choosing myself. And the story continues, not because it demands to be told, but because life keeps offering moments worth noticing. Morning arrived gently again, and I accepted it without resistance. Breath felt steady. Thoughts felt clear. The quiet no longer asked for explanation. I stepped outside early and walked further than usual. Streets looked different when viewed without urgency. Corners, once passed quickly, now held details. A cracked step, a blooming vine, a hand-painted sign fading in sunlight. Observation became a form of gratitude. At the park, an elderly man sat feeding birds. He noticed me watching and smiled. We exchanged a few words, nothing personal, nothing heavy. The exchange mattered more than the content. Human presence does not always require history. Returning home, I realized how much of my past had been shaped by anticipation. Waiting for someone to need me. Waiting for approval. Waiting for reassurance that I mattered. Now nothing waited on me, and that freedom felt sacred. I prepared breakfast and opened a book I had started weeks earlier. Reading without distraction felt indulgent. I lingered on sentences, let meaning settle. Time expanded when no one demanded it. Later that day, a call came from the library coordinator. She thanked me for consistency, said the children responded well to calm energy. I smiled after hanging up. Stability has its own quiet influence. That afternoon, I rearranged my small space. Not because it was necessary, but because change felt welcome. I moved the chair closer to the window, shifted books into a new order. Control does not need to be dramatic to be empowering. In the evening, I cooked slowly, let aromas fill the room, ate with intention. I thought about how many meals I had rushed through while listening for someone else's needs. Now, hunger belonged only to me. As darkness settled, I sat quietly and reflected without judgment. Thoughts came, thoughts left. Memory visited briefly, then moved on. I understood then that healing does not erase the past. It teaches the present how to coexist with it. Days continued unfolding like this, uneventful by outside standards, profound by mine. I stopped marking progress. Progress existed whether I measured it or not. One afternoon, rain arrived unexpectedly. I stood beneath a shelter and watched people hurry. Their urgency no longer mirrored my own. I felt no desire to join the rush. Patience had become instinct. Another letter arrived weeks later, not from Marcus, but from someone unexpected, a former coworker who had heard through mutual friends that I was volunteering. She wrote about her own struggles, asked how I found balance after so many years of service. I considered my reply carefully. I wrote back that balance did not come from doing less. It came from choosing intentionally. Words felt honest. Enough. Sending that letter felt like closing a circle. Seasons shifted again. Leaves changed. Air cooled. My pace remained steady. I bought a warm scarf, walked beneath trees, shedding color, felt grounded in the moment. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. I noticed how often society celebrates transformation only when it is visible. Weight lost, careers changed, status gained. Quiet growth rarely receives applause, yet it sustains. One evening, Marcus invited me to dinner. I accepted without anxiety. The meal was simple. Conversation is polite. There was no attempt to revisit history. Acceptance does not require discussion. When I returned home, I felt no emotional aftermath, no exhaustion, no regret. That absence confirmed how far I had come. I spent more time alone without feeling isolated. Solitude became restorative rather than empty. I no longer feared stillness. Another year passed. Birthdays arrived quietly. Candles felt symbolic rather than celebratory. I made wishes centered on presence, not outcomes. I trusted life to unfold without my constant management. There were moments of sadness. Yes, loss does not vanish completely. It softens. It integrates. I allowed sadness without resistance. Emotion, when welcomed, passes gently. One morning, while sitting near the window, I realized I had not thought about the house in a long time. Not with longing. Not with resentment. It had become part of a story rather than a wound. That realization felt complete. I continued showing up at the library, continued walking familiar paths, continued choosing calm over chaos. Days became meaningful through attention, not achievement. I learned that dignity lives in alignment. Alignment with values, alignment with limits, alignment with truth. I no longer needed to prove resilience. It existed quietly within me. The world continued its noise. I no longer felt obligated to match it. I lived smaller but deeper. I listened more than I spoke. I rested without guilt. I offered kindness without depletion. And through it all, I remained present. My voice stayed soft. My life stayed whole. And the quiet carried me forward, gently, steadily, into whatever awaited next. Time continued unfolding with a steady patience, and I learned to move with it rather than ahead of it. Some mornings carried more light than others. Some felt heavier without reason. I stopped questioning those shifts. Emotional weather does not need explanation to be valid. I discovered comfort in preparation, setting clothes out the night before, writing small notes to myself, leaving space between plans. Space became a gift. At the library, a child once asked why I always spoke so softly. I told her that softness helps people feel safe enough to listen. She nodded as if she understood something important. Perhaps she did. As days passed, I realized my presence mattered, not because of effort, but because of consistency. Showing up gently creates trust without demand. I began noticing how often people rush to be heard while forgetting how to hear. Silence, when offered sincerely, becomes an invitation. Evenings grew quieter. I filled them with reflection rather than distraction. No television noise, no background chatter, just thought moving freely. I learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. One drains, the other restores. My phone rang, less frequently. Messages slowed. Invitations became rare. Instead of feeling dismissed, I felt unburdened. Availability is not the same as worth. I stopped apologizing for boundaries that protected my peace. That habit took practice. Years of conditioning do not dissolve overnight. Still, progress came. One afternoon, while walking home, I noticed my reflection in a shop window. I paused. The woman looking back appeared calm, grounded, present. I smiled at her. That smile felt earned. Memories surfaced occasionally, but without sharpness. The past had softened into narrative rather than pain. Distance had done its quiet work. I realized that forgiveness does not always require reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means releasing the need for resolution. I released it. Another volunteer asked why I never spoke about family. I answered honestly. I said some stories are sacred and do not need retelling. She respected that. Respect became something I noticed more often, perhaps because I was finally offering it to myself. As months turned again, I experienced gratitude without celebration, contentment without announcement. Life did not feel empty. It felt uncluttered. I began rising earlier, not from obligation, but preference. Dawn carried a kind of honesty. No distractions, no performance, just existence. I learned that peace is built quietly through choices no one applauds. Choosing rest over reaction. Choosing clarity over comfort. Choosing self-respect over approval. These decisions accumulate. One evening, Marcus called once more. He thanked me, not for money, not for forgiveness. For example, I listened. I acknowledged. I did not absorb responsibility that no longer belonged to me. Growth sometimes echoes forward. After that call, I sat in stillness and felt no need to analyze. Peace did not ask questions. As the year neared its close, I reflected on how far I had traveled without moving far at all. The journey had been inward. I no longer measured my days by productivity. I measured them by alignment. Did my actions reflect my values? Did my words protect my well-being? Did my choices honor the truth? Most days the answer was yes. I understood then that quiet strength does not announce itself. It settles into behavior. It reshapes how you respond. I stayed quiet when noise would have cost me myself. I stepped away when staying and demanded surrender. I chose dignity even when misunderstood. And in doing so, I reclaimed a life that belonged to me alone. If you're listening to this and feel unseen, unheard, or slowly erased by expectation, remember this. Your worth does not depend on how much you endure. Silence can be strength when chosen with intention. Walking away can be courage when staying demands self-betrayal. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to redefine belonging. You are allowed to live gently without apology. If this story resonated with you, stay here. Listen again. Listen deeper. Subscribe to this space where quiet voices are honored and lived experiences are treated with care. More stories like this will be shared. Stories of resilience, dignity, and human truth. You are not alone, and your quiet life matters more than you know.